All right, so why don't we go ahead and open up the meeting of June 21st, Parks, Recreation, Forestry Commission, agenda 2021. And so first item of business would be the acceptance of the minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you. Any corrections, additions, deletions? All right, hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, that takes care of the minutes from the last meeting. Our first item of new business is the Market Street Playground, or let's call it trying to find a playground, something on that side of town. Matt, I'll let you take it over from there.
Sure. Blake is joining us via his car.
His car.
Blake, are you able to hear us all right?
Oh yeah, we hear you just fine.
You're not at a drive-in movie or something, right?
No, we actually pulled off and we're in a business park and someone just walked up to my window at trying to ask me directions.
Oh, that's all right.
Unbelievable. Anyway, sorry about that. Are you ready?
Almost, Blake. I kind of forgot about one thing, and that's that I need to display your
Who's your co-pilot?
This is Katie, my partner. Sorry,
Okay.
we were over at a grand opening for one of our park shelter buildings over here in Germantown. So we're on our way back to Madison.
Oh, nice.
So you get both the architecture team tonight.
Yeah.
Architecture, you said?
Architecture, yep.
Architecture, yeah.
Matt, I appreciate you being our Vanna tonight here and showing their stuff.
but I'm poorly prepared for that role, so give me a minute.
Well, while you're doing that, I mean, do you want me to give a quick background on this, or how much does everybody know about
Please do.
this? Yeah. This project, guys, if you're not familiar, is the first step in the evaluation of a West Side playground or pocket park, if you will. This has been identified as a gap in the overall system for several years and several versions of the open space plan. And so two sites were initially identified as potential playground homes. And as we started looking at it, we identified a potential third. And so we're going to talk through those three sites tonight and kind of go through some pros and cons and really assess as a group, what are the priorities for the project? Do we want a more traditional playground setting? Do we want something a little more unique? And we'll show you the adjacencies with some of the residential land use. As soon as Vanna's ready, we'll be ready to go.
Well, it's nice to watch Matt working up a sweat here.
Yeah.
Seen him type in his password 20 times.
A bunch of stars. I've never used that password.
And all else.
So the general location we're looking at is on Market Street, right where it crosses the South Fork Trail.
Yeah.
So just west of the Greenway development, just west of Aspen Commons. If you guys can all picture that corridor, the first site is immediately north of Market Street. There's a parking lot there just west of the Market West Apartments.
Yeah.
And so the first site is kind of wedged right in that corner of that parking lot, Market Street, and the creek corridor. The second site is just south of Market Street. You know where the parking ramp is?
Yeah.
There's an open space immediately west of the parking ramp. Yeah, here we go. Thank you, Matt. If you can just zoom in on that first slide.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, just for your sake, we've talked about this quite a bit. I don't know if the public has, but we went many of these sites, and this is what it finally came down to. This is our last ditch hope, and that's why we're hoping you would come up with something really good.
Yeah, so we've took a look at these three sites, in the field. And then we did an analysis based on, somewhere where the other residential areas are. That first site on the north, we're calling site A just for sake of discussion. The middle one is B and the south site is C. Those are all parcels owned by the city. Now, they're not all park land per se, but they are all publicly owned lots. So that makes the challenge of acquiring land sort of off the table. There still needs to be some internal discussion if we choose B or, well, any of the sites, I guess, since it's under the purview of different departments. Matt, if you can scroll down a little bit so I can see the inset map on the right there. Yeah, so the light green areas are existing residential. The dark green area along Pleasant View there is, as you probably know, had quite a bit of discussion about different land uses. The hotel was recently shot down, but that is most likely going to be future residential. So that's important as we factor this in. We firmly agree with your assessment that this is a good spot for a smaller playground space.
Like, one thing I'll note for everyone is that recently there was Plan Commission discussion about redevelopment of this site, which is across from the Marriott Hotel, that would be potential residential development as well.
Yep.
Okay, good. So you see that circle in between the three green areas. That's the study area for these three sites we're looking at. And up on top of this sheet, we've done a real quick list of pro cons for each of the three. And maybe I'll defer that. If you can go to the second slide, Matt, we'll just talk about some of these benefits and drawbacks on all three. So to try and keep this an apples to apples discussion, we took a footprint of roughly 3,800 square feet, somewhere between 37 and 4,000. There's a little variation between the three sites, but that is a good size for a typical kind of neighborhood scale playscape. And so we're showing the footprint. We've got the same play structure. We've got a bank of swings. And then we've got several standalone play elements. So, very typical of what you would see in a neighborhood scale playground. Some of the interesting pieces on site A, which is the most northern that we're looking at here, is that there's a really steep drop off from the parking lot down to the trail. And while traditional playgrounds might view topographic change as a hindrance, it actually could be quite interesting. We're doing more and more playgrounds integrating topography, hill slides, zip lines, and taking advantage of that natural drop. So of the three, this is the one that gives you that natural benefit. It would require a little bit more demolition than the other two sites. So you can see the north-south sidewalk connecting the parking lot to the main Market Street sidewalk would come out. And it would also require removal of several sections of the old abandoned rail tracks, which, wouldn't be a problem. Those are basically there for heritage, not for use. The other thing you can see, there are 6 black rectangles underneath that brown shaded area. Those are the existing exercise equipment blocks. So those would need to get relocated, which we're showing on the second sheet. So some of the benefits of this site, we think the topography gives you a unique opportunity. Access to the public parking just immediately adjacent to the northeast. You've got great proximity to that trail intersection. You have excellent visibility from Market Street. So those are all positives. Some of the drawbacks, this is of the three the most costly option because you're going to have additional demolition. We would strongly suggest you put in a barrier fence between the playscape and Market Street, which is shown on the drawing. And then you have the relocation of the exercise equipment, which in the grand scheme of things is not a big number, but it is a factor. What did I miss?
Just to point out, Blake, the bottom picture here depicts one of these, use of topography in a playground, which I'm seeing a lot in a lot of different places, and it does provide a unique option. This one has, you know, is that a combination turf and poured in place surfacing, or
That one is that's all poured in place.
all poured in place?
Yep. Yep. But I mean, it could be combo turf and PIP. There's a lot of opportunity on a site like this to get creative. So that's, for us, that's exciting in a lot like this.
Oh, man.
Real quick, actually, sorry, go ahead.
What do those black squares represent again?
Are you talking about in here?
Yeah,
I don't.
That's a depiction of the playground structure. So it's showing
okay. All right.
there's a transfer platform, or there's a platform here, there's a platform here, and there's apparatus coming off of those
No, but
platforms.
he had mentioned the 4 squares that are the existing.
Um,
And that's what,
think of the best.
that would have to be relocated. He said,
Yeah.
existing.
So there is, and it's hard to see, there is an asphalt
Oh, I see those.
segment
open
here underneath,
blocks.
and that's what he's saying would have to be relocated, and he's showing it relocated down here.
Yep. Real quick, back on concept or site A. So I mentioned the barrier fence between the playground and the sidewalk. There's a couple ways you can skin that cat. Those top 2 images represent the 2 options we would suggest. One, you do something in the decorative metal, more architectural to fit in with the style of the new buildings that just went in. You know, it's black, it's aluminum, decorative spindles. Or you do something whimsical and contrast with that architecture. That second image, you know, those colorful slats. We do that quite a bit when we have potential donors on a project. So you can have each one of those pickets tied into a specific donor. A great way to raise money for a public project. So
Another thought, and I know I'll get points with Abby Attune here, but you could do some type of mural on, you know, instead of a slot fence, having some type of material, whether it's a solid wall or what, that could have a mural painted on it.
yep, for sure.
Do that on both sides and have it tied to the playground as well.
Yeah, you could imagine that colored fence and paint the other side with a mural. So the street side could be a mural, the side could be all the colors of the kids.
Yeah.
So that kind of wraps up our assessment of site A. We think you've got a really unique opportunity. There's nothing in the city currently like that, using topography to an advantage. So that's kind of fun. The biggest drawback for us, I think, is the additional cost. But again, you know, once we start running real numbers, that may be less of a challenge. So you want to go to site B for me, Matt? Perfect. So this is the site just south of Market Street. There's an existing detention basin that's taking stormwater from the parking ramp. Just, yeah, right there, that dark area. And there's a pretty nice flat space, which you guys have obviously seen, that is ironically sized about 4,000 square feet. So the perfect footprint for what we would want. And again, nice adjacency with the trail. If you were to relocate the exercise equipment there on the top side of the page, you know, we think that's a real benefit to having adult fitness and youth playscape with that adjacency. So if you were to locate the playground here, I might suggest you move the equipment from the north side to this spot anyway. Another big advantage of this spot is you have some built-in shade with that those mature trees to the south, which is going to give you really good shade coverage for majority of the day. In the morning, you'll get shade coverage from the parking ramp, and in the midday to late day, you're going to have those large trees casting the shade. So that's a real positive. And it's also kind of a fun site. You know, you've got a nice view to the west with the creek corridor. The east view is not so great, looking at the wall of the parking ramp. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. Another potential disadvantage of this site is the proximity to the creek itself, and water does attract kids, and so we need to factor that in. Are we going to be encouraging kids to migrate across the path and kind of explore the sides of the banks? That's not necessarily a negative. I just wanted to bring it up as a potential point of discussion.
Oh, but I think you face the same thing on your first option too, because you slide down the hill and you're 10 feet from the creek right there. So
Yeah, correct. So those
I
site
don't
A,
see
and B,
better, yeah.
yeah, site A and B both have that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about this topography being an asset here. That second image, or maybe it's the third image with the hill slide, you could, if you wanted to, do some artificial mounding on this spot and get some smaller change in topography. If you wanted to, you're not going to have the the 15-foot drop that we would on site A, but you could probably get 5 or 6 feet with some artificial mounding. But I guess in our view, this is more of a traditional playscape. That bottom picture is very, I guess, very typical of what we might see in a flat spot like this. So if you want to go to the third site for us, Matt. So as we walked the corridor and really started looking at the development patterns, this south site started to look more and more interesting. It's the perfect size. It's already owned, by a public utility. It's very flat. It's right at a trail junction going several different ways. You already have some exercise equipment directly across from it. The biggest downside to this is the lack of parking and visibility. So the other two sites, you'll have sight lines directly from Market Street, both north and south. This site is a little bit tucked off of Greenway, and so you wouldn't necessarily see it. It becomes more of a destination playscape, which is cool. That this might want to be an interesting, more interesting design. Maybe you theme it and it becomes that destination that you're going to ride or bike to, or sorry, bike or walk to. One option that Katie and I talked about is maybe you can strike a deal and allocate 5 or 6 of the parking stalls in that lot directly southwest. If you can work with that business owner, they may grant you access to their lot after hours or on the weekend, for example. So it may not be solely bike or ped access. But here again, pretty flat site. So any topographic changes we would want to do would be artificial. And of the 3 sites, this is the highest. So the potential for any flooding like we saw in 18 is pretty much null on this one. Site A is pretty high as well. But as we know, 18 was crazy high water. So Site B has the most potential for flood, being sandwiched between that small retention area and the creek. What did I miss, Katie? Any pros and cons?
I think we caught the majority of the list.
Yeah, I guess the one question we have on this site C is that building, Matt, is that a pump station?
It's a well house.
The well house, okay. So
In initial discussions with Public Works, they didn't see any concern with the playground.
Excellent, okay.
Either of those sites,
Correct.
So I think all 3 of these work, guys, and the cost differential, while site A is going to be a little bit higher, it's I don't think is a deal breaker. If you like that unique opportunity with topography, you like the sight lines, then that's a really great option. Otherwise, the other 2, again, have their own merit.
all right, and anything else?
I guess last point, the playground or the play structures that we're showing, these blocks are not necessarily the equipment we're proposing. These are just some of our standard blocks that we use for spatial arrangement. So don't get hung up on any of the photos we're showing you or those footprints. This is just to show you, hey, they all work equally.
Yeah, and your attempt to show the same footprint for all three is partly artificial, correct?
That's correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, because your B might have a little more room than others, or this one.
Correct. Yeah, and we would probably look at different types of equipment based on which site we end up going with.
One thing I want to point out is that this business, which I think a lot of people know what the business is, they don't own the property. The same company owns this building and parking lot as the parking ramp. So there could be, potential discussions on either availability of the parking ramp or the parking lot,
Yeah.
nights, weekends, that sort of thing.
Well, you don't have access, it's private parking lot up on the A site too, right?
No, that's public.
Oh, that's public.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I don't see this as a hugely car-driven kind of park. We're trying to address all of these units that are there. And I'm not sure how many people are gonna get in their car and drive 2 blocks to go to the park. So I'm still attracted by your B, because one of the things I'm thinking about is the human factor, or the parental and grandparental factor, is that places for people who are not the kids, but have to be there with the kids, have a place to enjoy the trail, the park, some shade, some trees, some benches. It becomes a much more human, comfortable setting on this one, where you put the one up on the top, and you've got to deal with both the fence. It's a very inhospitable place, I think, for somebody who's got to sit there with their kids and do these things. Most of our other parks have trees and shades, and there's nothing in that spot. So that this is, to me, I like that shade. I like the accessibility to the park. It just feels more like a more open space. And personally, this is the spot I prefer. This land is owned by Conservancy. It's under Conservancy control, is it not?
Correct.
Unlike the one that the C.
Yes,
All right.
all three would be different approvals.
Yeah. All right. Well, committee, any questions or comments to Blake? Well, we've got.
Yeah, what, on the rail line on site A,
Yes.
is there any permitting or requirements? I mean, it's city land. but as
And
far
the
as-
city owns the rail
City
spur
owns
as
the
well.
They do? Okay.
And I've been told that there wouldn't be any hesitation to removing some of the rail spur there because it's not needed.
No.
Yeah, it's my understanding that originally went in before the foundry went in, with the idea that we're talking about commuter rail, and that would be a great place to have put a commuter rail station. So that spur got put in by the city, and then it was folded and floundered, and we'll never probably see it again. And yeah. Other questions, comments?
The one thing I'd want Blake to address is the idea of multiple sites here.
Yeah.
And why that's a bad idea.
Okay, go for it. Like,
Yeah, so as we looked at this, Matt asked us to think about, could we split up the playscape into 2 or even 3 of these sites? And yeah, you certainly could, like sometimes you do with the exercise stations spaced out along the trail. The issue that we have with that is that as a parent, it becomes really hard to monitor your children, especially if they cross those typical age spectrums between, a toddler structure and a 5 to 12 structure. I might have little Johnny who wants to go to site A, but little Susie who wants to go to site B. And all of a sudden I've got Market Street in between those 2 sites. And for me to supervise that becomes a real nightmare. So I guess that's one reason I would try to steer you away from that. And the second is you're going to be paying for dual infrastructure. You're going to have edging for your playground. You're going to have your erosion control and your grading and all those other things that are not sexy in a project, but they're necessary to get the job done. And so for those 2 reasons, I guess we would encourage you to look at one site and one site only.
What's the maintenance thing, right, man?
yeah,
What's that?
The maintenance, the mowing around it and all of that,
I mean, yeah,
that's a given.
yeah. I mean, one of the concerns we talked about at the last meeting is this idea of the pocket parks and trying to sort of avoid the pocket park concept. And I look at B and C and whether there'd be a way to actually, you could have a play structure on one, say a play structure at B, and take C and make it like a little picnic ground or something where families could still go who aren't interested necessarily in the playground, but want a little green space, a little place to sit down, or with, you know, some of the kids go play on the playscape, but they have a place to have a little picnic or something like that. And do you see any serious issues with looking at both B and C as a combined possibility?
No, I don't. I actually think that site B may have the opportunity to get more than just the playscape in there. I think,
Yeah,
there's-
there's a lot of space south of that.
yeah, right. There's the woodlot in there. And then if you go back to the site B concept, Matt, where we had shown the relocated play equipment, if you leave, or sorry, the exercise equipment, if you leave that north of Market Street, that whole area could be a really nice gathering space. You could put a small shelter there, some seating, and that's close to the river. It's a nice view. So I think there is opportunity in site B, especially to do more than just a playscape.
Well, and I think that's part of what the impetus here is. It's not just simply kids in a playground. There's no parks of any size or shape for anything for anybody in that area.
Yep.
That's why I think this is the site that I'm most attracted by. Right, others, comments,
And
questions?
this is close enough to parking too.
It is,
Because
yeah.
people do drive to parks to play.
Yeah, so, but say just north of the street,
But,
it's a
you
city
know, I
lot.
look
so
at
you
that,
don't need
I look at that
permission.
south spot, like,
Yeah.
unless you've got cooperation from the business owner.
Right, but that's
We don't
close
have any
enough to the
options.
city parking. In a sense that makes an
Yeah.
easy little
And
jog
the trail
across the
goes
street,
under-
across the street.
Yeah, look, the trail goes into the
The
road.
trail
correct.
goes under the road, so you don't have to cross
Yeah.
the road.
Put those flashers that we put up there.
The shade is very attractive.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that John's right, that the main audience for this park is gonna be the immediate.
Yeah,
You're not gonna get people from far away.
And while I sort of appreciate the idea, the uniqueness of the slide going down 15 feet and things like that, most of the kids I know, they'll make use of anything you give them.
And that's all.
Yeah. So, all right,
So I've got two comments.
sure.
The first being that if this is your site, the central location is the one that you want to move forward with, that you make a referral to CLC.
Yeah.
Before taking any further action, that
Sure.
this is your preferred site and refer it to CLC. The second is more general. I think everyone's aware of our current playgrounds. When I've held the neighborhood meetings, they want traditional playground equipment. The same that every neighborhood has. Because we don't have an existing playground here, I'm gonna throw out a couple of concepts, the two that are really popular, and Blake, if you want to speak to either of these. One is nature-based play. Dane County Parks has done a couple of these, and my kids, there's one in Camrock Park outside of Cambridge that my kids absolutely love. So this could, with the whole conservancy issue,
Yeah.
the proximity of the creek could be a great place to explore that nature-based play. The other is the more fitness-based obstacle course, Ninja Warrior, very popular with the kids. That they're building playgrounds like that now too, and these are things that, do you want all your playgrounds to look like every other playground, or do you want the uniqueness that kids are gonna come and seek this out or wanna go? Cause I know kids in town that have lists of their favorite playgrounds in the city, whether that's at schools or,
Yeah.
and they like rank the playgrounds and they wanna go and see them all. So the idea that only kids from this neighborhood are gonna come here, I think it speaks to what Nick said. They're gonna get on their bikes and go, and they're gonna find this if it's cool.
Right, but
Well,
so-
And parents who have their children at home.
Yeah.
Will go seek out these playgrounds.
Yeah.
As something to do.
And they go from playground to playground, to
Yeah.
playground.
Yeah.
One day they'll be here, one day they'll be there.
Yeah.
And that's why, to me, the parking accessible,
Is important.
having accessible parking is important because. Especially something new, you get the first couple of years and people are gonna seek this park out, especially if it's something unique.
Well, it's along the conservancy, and I think that, whether it becomes a, nature play park or whatever. I think to make it, I understand the sense that they want their park to be like everybody else's park, but I think that's the parents talking, not the kids talking.
Kids will have fun no matter what.
Yeah, and they'll, if it's a nice park and if it's in a setting like the B where the parents might be more likely to want to come and actually sit there for an hour while their kids play. That's why that spot, just the trees, the park, it's close to parking, but it's not on the road. You don't have to worry about kids running up or running out. It just seems to me the ideal of the three.
I like the
Well,
idea of a unique park, nature park or.
And don't get me wrong, I don't think you need to spend time deciding what that's gonna be
Yeah,
now. I mean, there are discussions about what you want the playground to be, what the budget is going to be.
Mhm.
Though, what surfacing, are we gonna stay with the conventional wood
Yeah.
fiber, or are we gonna look at, the poured in place or turf like we've done on other playgrounds? Those are all discussions for after we find out from CLC if they're willing to work with us on this.
All right. Well, Blake, we should let you go. Thank you very much. It's been very helpful, very informative.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks for
Great.
having us on it. And I think
Yeah,
you've got three really good options.
Yeah, now you can get out of the car and go somewhere else, restaurant or something.
Now we're driving back to Madison or Middleton.
Okay, sir. All right,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys. Yep, bye.
Right.
All right. Well, other comments, discussion?
So as we're kind of assessing this stuff, who is it that owns, who is it that we'd have to get approval from for the north side?
Conservancy
Oh, the
lands.
north side?
The
Is
north
that also
side,
conservancy lands?
North side is nobody. right?
the north side is,
City.
we run into these every once in a while where it's city owned, but no one really. Whoever lays first claim to it and is approved kind of gets it situation,
Okay.
so.
I'm just thinking like, Plan B is like, say, CLC is like, no, we don't want to give up that parcel for you. I think the north side would be the next best option. And just kind of think of contingencies.
Yeah, I've driven by the south side too, and it took me 10 minutes to get through the parking lots, just
Yeah.
figure out how to just even get back there. And even if they gave parking, it seems to me,
Well, the other thing is, even if they give parking, if it's restricted to after hours or weekends.
Yeah.
What about the person that shows up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday,
Right. Parking.
right?
I
Or
mean,
they get in trouble for
Yeah.
parking there.
I mean, I think I concur. I think B would be the first choice and A would be the second choice. And understand the issue about the street. We should just dig a tunnel underground, let the kids run through the tunnel. They have more fun in the tunnel.
There is,
Where is it, Tom?
there is.
There is a tunnel. So they wouldn't necessarily have to cross the street. Oh, because
You wonder.
And thanks to the flood, it's a brand new.
Oh, okay. I never went down there to look at that. Yeah, so that doesn't totally rule out the possibility of linking it together. Yeah.
That would be cool if we could afford it.
Remember, it's not just kids that were, the adults,
That's right.
like the place
That's
with
why
the
the B
trees.
to me seems so attractive.
Dogs.
Well, I'm getting a bit of a consensus, and maybe what I would do is entertain a motion that we look at B as our primary choice and send it off to Conservancy Lands Committee.
Sure, I'll make that motion since I'm
All right.
Conservancy Lands and.
Yeah, you can indicate.
And, see if we can push them forward. This hasn't come up before, so I can't really say too much about how they'll look at this, but, for me, this is pretty straightforward.
I would second it.
All right, we have a second. Other further discussion, comments?
If they, if you folks balk a little bit, if they balk at this, you could maybe trade them out and say, well, why don't you take some of the overview of some area along Strickers that could be
We'll give
put
them the
into
end of the
more
railroad.
conservancy.
Do we want to
Trade.
get
No,
into
we don't want to
negotiation on land?
We'll give them the Madison part of stickers.
The south side.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, well, let's see what kind of response. I mean, I don't know that this is ours or their decision. Matt, maybe you know better. Ultimately, it become a council decision. Yeah.
If,
So
if,
I'm making the case.
if PRFC is recommending this as the best location.
Yeah.
And we go to Conservancy Lands and they say no, council is the arbiter.
Okay. Well, I think that's what we're saying, and I think that's probably of the, yeah. All
I
right,
don't
so
think anybody wants to get into a situation like that, but it's happened before.
so any other discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. Big Park Development Fund.
So this is the continuation of the discussion from the last meeting.
I must say, I didn't quite understand your tables.
Okay, well, I'll try and make sense of them.
That's good.
So this shows all the fees that we have collected since the law change.
Okay.
On the right here, it shows the Masters 2 residence and Red Tail Acres development that we collected went towards Taylor Park construction.
And it was the fee in lieu and the improvement program.
Correct.
Yeah.
Same for the Lakeview shelter with these fees and portions of these fees.
Okay.
And then Erdman, all of the fees with those. Okay, so then this chart shows the updated, removing the funds that were expended at the
Okay.
top.
So
This shows the balance along with these two projects and what we expect to still.
What is the FM?
Firefighters Memorial Park,
Oh,
ADA and stormwater. And this is estimated at somewhere around $280,000. I'm showing 100 from each of these funds,
Largest.
and as well as the balance being from our ADA allotment in the capital budget. And then the Erdman dollars that we have yet to spend. So this is the commitment to build the trail on the cross-country ski trail. The trail segment to connect Pleasant View Road to Erdman, so continuing the trail that comes up the hill to the site. Yep. And while the bridge is
We don't have to
included
pay
in
for
the, we don't have to pay for
Yeah.
the bridge. And then the pump track, asphalt pump track. So that is where the 652 comes from.
Okay.
230 of that is the trail from Pleasant View to Erdman, and 150 is the pump track. And the remainder is what we're obligated in our lease agreement with CXC to expend on the trail development on their property. And then the third sheet shows after those projects are finished, what remains in the park development fund. Does not account for any of the projects that are currently in various stages of plan commission review, like the common ground site.
It's just the common ground sense.
There's a rezoning, there's a proposal for residential development on common ground across on Branch and Century.
Branch and Century, yeah.
There's also a couple of other development projects that are in the works at various levels that will all pay fees once construction starts, once they pull their building permits. So. But the question becomes here is, as we approve projects from park development, we would have to identify where the funding's coming from these projects.
Well, and then now this has to be tied to having some relationship to these developments.
Some, yes.
Yeah.
And so of note, so Cardinal View is Graver.
Yeah.
The Tresta Aviary is the former Bowling Green softball, the market. And then Trotta is the one on Parmenter, where there's kind of a vacant lot that next to the liquor store there.
Oh, yeah.
So those are the three.
Yeah, okay.
I'd make a case that two of those could support this Market Street player. And then we'll talk more about future capital in a little bit.
There's future capital.
Uh-huh.
All right.
So this was more of an informational item, just
Yeah.
kind of wanted to update based on the last conversation of what this looks like now with that change.
Is there any, I mean, on plan commission, but no, any near-term development that's going to be putting funds in? At what point in the process of,
When they take out their building.
okay, because there's the one up down where the Emilio sub is, there's that big purple building going in there, and so we'll get something off of that as well, but that's not anywhere near where this is.
Bruce come.
Well, that's long term.
Yeah, that's
We
over
won't
10,
see.
12 years.
Yeah, and they've got lots of discussions to occur yet.
Yeah,
I think the one you referenced where Emilio's is, or next to Emilio's, and then the one on the Branch and Century.
that's right. And that one's been gone through, these plan committees sign off on that one.
The other things that are in discussions, the Captain Bill's site, I know that's a lot of controversy with that.
Oh, yeah.
There's
Oh,
also,
yeah.
there's also across from the Marriott, that
Yeah.
Newcomb development, proposed development.
Mhm.
And I know that tomorrow night at Plan Commission is a what I would call a subdivision, maybe it's not that level, but adjacent to Graver Pond, off of where Bellefontaine, kind of in one of those
Yeah.
Parmenter, east of Parmenter, across from the mock. So
It's called they're filling in the bar belt. They're right back in the city and all that stuff. Yeah, and I have to miss that meeting. I taunt them. The joys of missing a plan committee. They're good. Okay. Any other questions for Matt? I guess not. Well, thank you, Matt, for that update. Let's move on to item 4, discussion of future capital projects. Priorities.
So with the change to the park development fund, of note, we had planned for the Lakeview tennis courts to be funded. That's no longer going to be an option. We have just looking at tennis courts, Lakeview is in need of repair. The high school is coming up in our planning. And that's a bigger discussion for me of, we get 6 to 8 weeks of use on those courts. And is it fair of the city to be responsible for half of that cost? And that's a bigger discussion that we need to have with the school district, but I wanted to put that on your radar.
Didn't we have some of those 2-3 years ago? We were talking about this course.
So we had, what you're referencing, John, is we had a tennis court analysis done.
Yeah.
And I keep bringing this issue up as something that we need to have on our radar.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing is, the Stonefield courts were resurfaced in 2013. And they did an alternative use of a product that the tennis court industry, when I talked to the people that did our study, they're not fans of what was done. It was an overlay on asphalt, which they basically said is never a good idea.
Mhm.
And so as that overlay has cracked, we now have the asphalt crumbling underneath. And so we're looking at a major repair there. You guys probably be surprised to know that I think about this stuff a lot.
Sorry.
And with this change with funding and what is realistic moving forward, what we're looking at in the next 3 to 5 years for tennis courts is up to 300,000 at the high school. Over to probably, okay, we'll use 200,000 as a rough estimate for Lakeview and 100,000 at Stonefield. Of that $600,000, what do you realistically expect that we get in the capital budget planning process?
Probably Zippo. We're close to.
If we got one of them done, I'd be excited, right? Okay,
And there's no developments going on in those areas that would generate new funds.
so the high school, to me, is separate that.
Yeah.
We have 100% responsibility of Lakeview and Stone. Okay. Knowing what we know about where the capital budget is and park development funds, can we sustain tennis courts in neighborhood parks? That's your first discussion item. Would we be better off building a complex at Lakeview? We currently have 4 there. Would we be better looking at 6, or if we could get, I'm not sure we could fit 8. But would it be more cost effective to say, we're gonna build a complex at Lakeview? We're gonna figure out a relationship with the school district that doesn't have us, that's equitable to our availability and use, okay? And we're gonna, unfortunately, and I know this will not be popular, but abandon the idea of these neighborhood tennis courts where we have only 2 courts. And it's gonna be a tough thing for those neighborhoods. But the reality is, in our current funding, do we have the ability? Because I will make a case, and I think the attorneys, based on the discussions I've had on them, would go along. But if we were gonna build a 6 or 8 court facility in Lakeview that served the entire community, now you can bring yourself back to the discussion of use of park funds.
Do you have any tracking and usage? I know there's like the tennis courts up by Strickers and I go by there every day and I don't ever see anybody on those.
We have rental. Now, Stricker, I don't want to say we lucked out with the flood, because nothing about the flood was
Yeah.
lucky. But we'd be in the same situation we're in today with these others with Stricker if
Yeah.
that wasn't declared flood.
Because we just redid those.
Yeah, and they're beautiful.
But again, do they get used much?
We have a group that rents them, a youth and a gentleman who does youth instruction rents those.
Okay.
He also rents the ones at Stonefield. And outside of that, how much community neighborhood use we get? We
Yeah.
probably get as much use you don't want on them with kids riding bikes or playing lacrosse as you do with actual tennis.
Yeah, I guess where I'm leading is that the idea of a central facility in some ways that becomes a destination facility might have better draw and better action because it's like even tennis, the basketball court, like a Tatum, that not seen anybody in 2 years play basketball.
Right.
On that court. And so having it there might be a convenient, but is it a good expenditure of resources?
I'll argue that the basketball court there would get use if it wasn't underwater.
You're being awfully big.
And
It's been out of water for a year.
so what I've seen is
Yeah.
if you drive by the basketball courts at Taylor or Orchid Heights,
Mhm.
they're 100,000 times more likely to be in use than any of our other courts.
Yeah.
What's the difference? We've got glass adjustable backboards that are nice, they're durable, they hold up.
Yeah.
And so we have funds in the budget this year to do 2 courts. And the plan was Woodside Heights and Meadows, because Meadows is this year's playground. They're the 2 that I kind of want to do those as we do the playgrounds and put that kind of facelift on the park.
Yeah.
And that we need to figure out pre-C, because that's a whole bigger issue with the parking lot, basketball
Yeah.
court, shelter.
I mean, you're right on Woodside, and for a while, one time they just hauled a picnic table and put it in the middle of the court.
Yeah.
Because it was the only dry place to have a picnic table. Yeah.
So
Well-
the other issues here, I mentioned the pre-C shelter is that's still a concern of mine, is that, yeah, we don't have a funding source to do that project. But I think it should still be a priority moving forward of something that we keep on our radar and try and find a way to complete that project.
So, question about that. I know that, could you make an argument? And I think I already know the answer to this question. I'm still gonna say it, ask it. Could you make an argument that replacing park shelters, making new ones, maybe making it a little bit bigger, is a direct result of the growth of the community because of the developments that have been the Park Development Fund post 2018?
So I was able to make that argument for Lakeview based on the addition and the ability to serve, because Lakeview serves the whole community.
Mhm.
I think you can make the argument for pre-seed, but I think they're gonna only buy a percentage of the project. And so you're going to need another funding source, and I think those are all things that we can lay out the groundwork for and do, but it goes back to this. What are our priorities as we move forward into, because the next meeting, the capital budget's gonna be in front of you. So it's kind of an opportunity to get this discussion and what are those priorities you want to see?
What about the new building that's just about done approval by the trailhead at Century? That's close to Parisi Park. Will funds come in from that?
So
And that's only like
that's-
3 blocks away from Parisi Park. It's a 5-story apartment
Oh,
where the Branch Street retreat.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah, so there may be a future moment where
Mhm. Okay.
that would be a likely place you could grab some of that stuff,
Yep.
or depending what happens at Captain Bill's, it seems like that's in the neighborhood.
Okay.
I guess it comes back to our discussion we had last week, that it's, the pocket parks are nice, but the pocket parks are also expensive and problematic for the amount of use that they get. And it would seem to me that based on that discussion, that putting priorities towards things that are larger and fit a broader range of people, particularly with this budget thing like this, at the expense of the pocket parks is a way to go. So if it means losing a tennis court, losing something in a pocket park that may be problematic or detrimental to the small neighborhood with giving the funds to do something on a bit larger scale seems to me a more practical directive. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
Well, maybe it seems more practical, but neighborhood parks are just, I mean, kids can ride their bikes, kids can walk.
Yeah, I know.
They don't have to be driven someplace.
I don't disagree with you at all. It just comes down to when you need $2 and you have $1.
I always had a vision of little neighborhood pocket parks where you work with the developer and have the HOA do the basic maintenance. I mean, that's a big cost, is having someone go out there and mow a relatively small section of land every week, and you could avoid that and do a few other things. Then, you know, that's a model to look at, but we don't have anything like that in front of us. Back to the tennis courts, I kind of like the idea of having them more centrally located, because they sort of become self-policing. Also, I don't know if we've had anything here, but my past experiences led me to believe when you have tennis courts near residentials, you get someone complaining that there's someone out there hitting tennis ball against the backboard or something terrible like that at all hours of the morning.
We don't deal with that. The issue we have with tennis courts is competition amongst private entities who maybe monopolize the courts because we have a relatively low fee structure, and other private entities thinking that they shouldn't have that access.
Tennis courts and pickleball courts.
It's not even, we get little of that. It's the tennis people fighting with each other.
What's the demographic on the tennis people? I mean, age.
Well, this is competing over dollars for youth instruction.
Youth instructor.
The
But I mean-
private facility in town that has their own space.
Yeah.
Arguing that we shouldn't be renting out our courts to tennis instructors to run lessons.
Yeah, because they should get the money in their own term.
Yeah, that's an argument that's gonna go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, we had that at the university all the time. Teaching, having our students teach music lessons, and we were competing against all the private music stores.
And from a staff standpoint, we have a policy we have
Yeah.
rules and policy to follow, and until the rules and policy change, there's very little we can do about that.
Charge no fee, just open up and say, fight for it, guys. Yeah. I guess when I was asking about the tennis, it strikes me that tennis is not a young kid's sport. It's an adult or teenage sort of level.
I kind of feel
Because
it's cyclical though. I kind of feel like my youngest daughter is almost 7, is starting tennis lessons.
Okay,
On Thursday, she's doing the youth program at Orchid Heights, but then through high school, right?
Yeah.
And they'll play through high school, but then there'll be a lull in their, in 20s and 30s and maybe 40s, and then as they get a little bit older, maybe people pick it back up.
Well,
But-
that lull is when they're raising families.
Yes,
When the
I know,
families get
yeah.
old enough.
Exactly.
till then he goes into golf. I mean, it was partly trying to think about Sue's comments that there are some things for which having the park in your neighborhood is critical and important because kids want to go there. Is tennis one of those things?
No.
As opposed to tennis is something you're more likely to have a demographic that can actually would get in a car and go to do tennis.
Well, that's my thought
More
too.
like
is how many people walk or bike to a tennis court in their neighborhood as opposed to getting in their car and driving to the same
Yeah.
tennis court? And if you're gonna take a couple away, it's not like it takes you 25 minutes to drive from your house to Lakeview
Right.
Park in Middleton. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
See, then some could argue that, well, I think shelters are good because then you look at, say, a pocket park. And we're just talking about this West Side Park and having a place where the adults who bring the kids also have a sort of place that they feel welcome in that space. So you go to Woodside Park and having a little place that's in shade or something, thereby where the parents come in, might add more value than necessarily having the basketball or the fun, just throwing out hypotheticals.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I've mentioned to some of you individually, is the idea of a accessible playground. They're called universal playgrounds or all abilities playground. Lacrosse just opened an absolute gem. It's called Crane Park. It's their all abilities playground. This is something that we don't currently have in our system. And although we make attempts at each of our playgrounds to have accessible items, this would be a playground that's designed for full access to someone who's disabled or has a disability. I think it would be a great template to look at fundraising to support such a project, as well as it would obviously be a new amenity. It'd be a new amenity, which could also have park funds help support the idea of that project.
Right.
Sorry, Aaron, I'm not used to doing both of these. I didn't see you have your hand up.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I have a baby that's like whacking
Okay.
the computer. So
Mhm.
sorry, I will lower my hand, but
Oh, okay, sorry, so you didn't.
But-
Okay.
yeah, but
Oh,
I'm
say something.
I'm glad to join the conversation and just, support the idea of a central tennis location for Lakeview, because I mean, even at Orchard Heights, I see kids using it just to, just be crazy, far more than people actually using it for tennis. It's not like you ever just go to a park with your kids and happen to bring a tennis racket in the perchance chance, like people are going to play tennis, they're going to play tennis. So I really don't think it's an issue to, at least for these parks, combine it and make it more of a central location for Lakeview. And I think it would be much better use of funds.
Yeah. Good.
Yes, I'm all aboard the all access park and happy to help fundraise, whether I'm a part of PRFC or not.
Yeah.
If I can circle back just for a moment, you talked
Thank you.
about doing an overlay on the tennis court that didn't work well. What, was that just more asphalt?
No, it was some, I don't know enough about the product. It was done in 2013.
Okay.
And it was when I discussed it with Fred Kolkman, who did our tennis court analysis and study, it was quickly dismissed by him as something that wasn't going to work. And it all I can do is look at what's occurred and agree with him.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Thank you for bringing up that notion, this concept of that you're thinking about all the time. More different. I mean, we have to rely on you for both having the eyes and ears and brain that you see all of these things, and we have to rely on you to to bring things to us because we don't have the details that you have.
Right.
The reality of the situation is we have a great park system.
Mhm.
We do not have a sustainable plan of how to fund maintenance of our park amenities. And this change with the park development fund doesn't help us in any way, shape, or form. And I don't see in the short term that we're gonna get, all of a sudden allocations of capital funds to do it. I'm hesitant to call it deferred maintenance, but maintenance, realize we're in year 2 of our playground replacement fund being funded by the capital budget. The first 2 playground replacements we did at Orchid Heights and at Woodside Heights were funded by park development. Parisi last year and Meadows this year are now moving into the capital budget where they need to be, but that's just playgrounds. The idea of our tennis courts, our ball fields, this idea that, do we have anything in the parks that can last 30 years?
Yeah.
And what is that total cost of investment? And you divide that by 30, and that's what we should be allocating each year to replacement of the park system, and we're not there.
And we're not gonna be there, I'm sure. Right. Well, but that's why I think this discussion, particularly about the tennis sites, is a good discussion, because you're sort of going through the inventory and say, we're not really in a position to be looking at a lot of new parks, but we have a lot of duplication across different parks. And do we really need that, or can we consolidate in ways that maybe a short-term sort of small loss to the neighborhood,
But the other comment I want to make is we have a funding source for new parks.
Yeah.
And it's going to be greater
then
than
they have to be
ever.
maintained.
It's going to be greater than ever because we can't use those funds to do other things.
Okay,
So in a way, it's providing a funding source for the new parks, but we're not maintaining what we have. And that's my crux and concern long-term is how do we ensure the viability of our park system?
Well,
Well, then, once you also have a new park, how are you gonna help pay for that new parks maintenance down the road too.
Yeah, or you don't put another tennis court in a new park or something.
Right, well, I mean, so Matt brought up the idea of the accessible playgrounds. My hometown, Port Washington, and built one, it was a complete community built. They fundraised the whole thing, community
Yeah.
came together and actually built it, okay? Well, I don't remember how old that park is, it's probably around 10, 15 years old now. Maintenance came doing it, right? They had to start maintaining it, and the city did not provide any funding for maintenance. What they had to do is do a fundraising round two.
Round two.
And I think they were able to get quite a few funds, generosity of the people of the city, but it's like, is that the model we're gonna have to go with? You know, fundraising to, hey, we've got this beautiful park, can you want to maintain it? Can you help us maintain it?
Yeah, and part of the problem is like, do you rely on 100% volunteer organization to do 100% of the work to raise 100% of the money? And it's just not gonna happen. I mean, you need people who really know and understand what to do and how to do these things. So you need some level, you need the city and the staff of the city and people in the city to take some ownership in that process.
And our track record on fundraising is.
Well, we so far we're doing okay, actually, with the green, the village green part, that's been semi-successful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They've raised.
That's almost done, right?
They've got commitments for the funds they needed to fundraise.
So we've also raised the money for the War Memorial Lakeview.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, and
That was the
But
VFW.
it's also
But they do have,
special.
okay, but I mean,
But there are organizations that,
I think we need to have some organization for fundraising, some
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a city priority.
Yeah,
I think to do that, with the
Right.
city involves.
Now, what about your budget as far as staffing, as these little parks go in? Are you, you know, you were behind the curve, and seems to me they were resistant to doing anything.
So my concern on staffing is that we have managed growth by adding LTE staff, right? They're becoming more and more difficult to find and have them on staff. Unfortunately, Middleton lost their high school baseball game today, so I suspect we'll have one of our LTE staff starting tomorrow. But it's June 21st, June 22nd tomorrow, you know, and the idea that June 1st school is out, you know, and we have very few high school, most of our staff are college age that work in our parks. Because they have to be 18 plus to operate the equipment, the weed whip and all that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can keep adding LTE funding, but if we can't identify the LTE staff that are willing and want to work, at some point, are you going to have to look at adding a full-time staff member because we're not able to identify the LTEs?
Right.
Yeah, and if you look at say 4 LTEs or 1 full-time, what do you get more work out of it? Well, who knows how much the pandemic has done this too.
Well, and right now, I think we have an adequate workload in the winter. And as long as we get the LTE staff to come in, you know, and April to May, I think you saw it this year. We were behind in mowing, we were behind in string trimming. And once the college kids came back, we caught up real quick. But you're also asking 6 guys to get all the shelters up and running, the pool up and running, and keep up with mowing. And we had a really aggressive spring from a grass growing standpoint. So it's not perfect.
Sorry, Matt, I'm laughing just because one of my coworkers would not let up about the boulevards on University not being mowed. And I said, I think we have bigger concerns.
That's public works, right?
That is a good question. I know we do the Parmenter boulevards, the Allen
Do you really?
boulevards. We probably have the University boulevards too. I'll confirm that tomorrow.
Why is Parks doing it?
Allen and University ought to be county.
We have the mowers.
Oh,
Those who have
For a
homes
while
in the
until they
morning.
break down and then there's no budget to repair.
Well, the trade-off has been is that Public Works has often done a lot of our street tree work.
Right.
So,
So
Alright.
can we get back to new building and maintenance? The monies that we have for new parks, is there some way that we can divide that money and, or take a, you know,
Can't be set,
for-
the park development fund cannot be set aside to use for future maintenance. It has to be used on new amenities or, you have to directly tie it to growth of the community. In terms of new, that they're not gonna allow for maintenance in any way,
Not replacement either, when it becomes so dilapidated.
not as I read the law. But realize that the developers that went and got this law change were focused on ensuring that the dollars that they were paying to the city
To their benefit.
went to their development and that it was tangible.
but they didn't think about me.
It's not their concern when they're trying to sell homes and fill
Yeah.
something in.
Because then once they're sold, it's not their problem anymore.
Because I don't really see, I don't know much about fundraising, but I don't really see fundraising as being a sustainable way to fund maintenance.
Not maintenance, they'll
No,
get
no,
new
people
projects.
won't get
and-
money.
You need something sexy for fundraising, and maintenance is the opposite of sexy.
You know, after 15 years of fundraising at the university, is that people only want to give money to something that is a going issue. They want to be part of something good. They don't want to be faced with something that they see as a losing battle. So, I mean, you put in a sustainable or, you know, complete access playground like you're talking about, full ADA compliant, that becomes something that's enticing and sexy, something to be part of, and you can raise money for that. That's
Sean, have you seen in your history that you are able to talk with certain donors about, okay, you're gonna make a $50,000 contribution to this project, but we also want you to consider, you know, funding an endowment or, you know,
Yeah.
is some additional contribution to fund the long-term
Yeah,
maintenance.
it depends on how much they actually give, like when we built the new school of music building. If you're giving $15 million, they're more than happy to say, take 2 million of that and set it aside. Because I'm putting the other 13 million I care about. If the person is giving 100,000 or something, that's a not. You know, they're trying to get more than their $100,000 worth of acknowledgement.
See, and my
So I
history.
think you're
is-
mostly right. You can't count on that money to maintain.
So when my big fundraise project, we raised 1.4 million.
Mhm.
And one of the caveats is we had to create an endowment that was going to fund the eventual replacement of the amenities. And that was successful and worked. And I think on big projects, on like, say we look at a outdoor pool at some point, there's
Yeah.
gonna have to be a considerable fundraising portion there. And that's where it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to look at, you know, endowment giving too, but
Well, and part, you know, most of the people who would give money, they're not sitting there looking at bottom line budgets and scraping through it. I mean, so a good project, when you come up with, we say, we need $20 million for this project, that should already be including what they need for an endowment for maintenance and stuff like that. That just becomes part of the cost. And when you go after the $10 million donor for the 20 million, says this costs 20 million, we need 10. Actually, you ask for 15, and it's actually that I can only 10 at least. Yeah, but so you have to build that into the structure,
right.
so they're not adding that on.
I always thought you've got to get 4 families in the room that could all pay 5 for a $20 million.
Well, you know, they
project.
talk about the pyramid of 10
Oh, yeah,
names,
yeah.
and if you can't get 10 people to cover 90% of the project, you're never gonna.
So to answer one of your questions that kind of ties to this even from last week. Our biggest challenge with maintenance is that the city is limited in its ability to raise the levy. The only adjustment we can make in the levy is the growth of the community. So if we grow 3.2%, our levy increase can go to 3.2%. Well, when health insurance goes up 10%, you know, and our biggest expenditure in the operating budget is staff. So that takes that, and then you've got to find other ways to cut to make up that difference. So when they took out the inflation factor in the ability to raise the levy, that's really limited cities in issues like this, and you have to be really creative. Middleton's fortunate. I worked for a community that, you know, exciting growth was 0.6%, you know, and then you're always in a cutting moment. So.
Matt, as far as the park development funds and Parisi goes, with the fact that Pheasant Branch runs right along that, is there no opportunity with how many of these different, increasing residential developments that butt up against Pheasant Branch, increasing the use would, sustain the need for new facilities?
I mean, the challenge here, and I try not to play attorney, but I've spent a lot of time with Matt Fleming lately between CXC and this issue and some other things. And I think their concern is if the city is sued by a developer over inappropriate use of these funds, how do we justify our interpretation of the law and how we use the funds? And so there's a lot of gray area. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is we have to make a compelling case of why here's the project we want to do. Here's what we want to use park development funds for, submit it to them and ask them to draft an opinion.
Right, but I think Aaron's got a good point. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
I keep talking about the thing at Branch Street. There's one across the street. Both of those developments, that's putting in, 150 new residential areas that have come in over the last 2 years, and both of those are very close to Precinct Park.
Yeah.
And I would think that would be a case worth trying to make.
So what determines which park an area is associated with?
What the judge says when it goes to court.
Yeah, that's the problem.
and there's no case law out there on this bill. So it's complete gray area.
So you're asking what the radius would consider within.
And I would interpret that if it's an amenity, like say the Bald Island complex at firefighters,
Be the whole city.
whole city.
Yeah.
Because it's, everybody uses it, Lakeview, that's gonna be our large shelter, everybody uses that.
Like a tennis complex at Lakeview.
Yeah.
And the problem you run into is that new complex comes in and they have need for more tennis, more baseball, more.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna build a park that's gonna provide all those amenities, but you might need to add on to some parks. And I think that's part of how you make your argument on some of these things.
On the Precinct shelter, that would be a new build, so that's that would, presumably you didn't get sued, that would fit within the guidelines.
Presuming. I mean, the big thing is, can you get opinions from the biking and running associations around here? Like, I don't bike or run, but my husband does, and having a need for year-round bathrooms as a most basic element, access to bathrooms for more than 10 weeks a year, I think is pretty strong need when it's a main point on Pheasant Branch. So.
I'm happy to work on that and kind of see what response I get. I still think it's going to be a percentage and that we're gonna have to have another funding source.
Okay.
Not saying that that's insurmountable, because that's why we put in capital budget requests.
Yeah.
And if we can show that the attorneys have said up to X percentage, they're comfortable with us funding from park development, we need this balance from the capital budget.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah. But my initial reaction was, this is a neighborhood park. We've got to step back and take a look at this and try and figure it out. So.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. And I'm just trying to figure out, ways to just generally serve the community around here. And if there's anything I can help with pulling together data, I'm happy to.
There's nothing that precludes somebody going to the developer and saying, if we did this with your funds, would you sue us?
Well, then they would know you're doing it.
Then you're doing it.
So then you're like.
No, we don't.
I'm not suggesting, but
We don't ask.
when push comes to shove.
Ask her to do this.
Yeah, go to Cherry.
We don't ask those kind of questions.
All right, well, I think we can go on and on. I'm willing to do that, but I think you probably have a lot of stuff that's come at you, so nobody minds. Let's move on.
Sure.
And let's look at item number 5, which is the lemming.
If I can.
Go ahead, you can.
Is there interest in a future meeting of having this fundraising discussion?
Yeah.
It's worthwhile.
I don't, You mean in this committee? I
Well,
think we're all in agreement that fundraising would be a good thing, but I don't think this is something this committee can do on its own or
no,
separate
but
from.
we have to find a vehicle or an entity or some way of, because again, there's a project size where you can ask people to cut a check to the city.
Yeah.
But once you get to a certain level, people don't want to do that. And it's a detriment because they write their tax, they write their check for taxes to the city of Middleton and they don't want to write any more checks to us.
And all that money goes to the city because that's what they run it to.
Mine
maybe
got
not.
really big.
Well,
second-
and there are other advantages to not
Yeah.
having it all go through the city as far
Oh,
as
yeah.
bidding processes and everything else goes, use of volunteers, so,
No, you definitely want to have a separate entity.
yeah.
I think, Matt, this somehow needs to be something that still has to be a city-driven thing, not a committee-driven thing. And that we certainly, I think, we would be anxious and interested in being part of it in the planning, but for us to meet, to somehow be the fomenters of this, I'm not sure that's.
Right.
All right,
That's fair.
so now number 6, July meeting.
Yeah, we have not historically met the first meeting in July. I have scheduled vacation for the 3rd week of July where I'm gonna be out of town in Minneapolis. Cause I take cool vacations to go coach basketball. I'll be coaching basketball on that
You
vacation.
can't do it here because the courts are no good.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That
Okay.
sounds cool. That sounds fun.
Oh, it's.
Well, and I mean, the double whammy with the early July meeting, it's not just early July, but it is literally the legal holiday for the 5th, because falls on a Sunday.
It's a,
Is there urgent stuff that we actually have to meet at all in July? Do you
there's,
see anything coming down?
there is I'm anticipating, there's a staff recommendation on plan commission's agenda tomorrow night for referral to PRs.
What issue?
The subdivision that's going for conceptual review. The Bell Farm.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So could we have it on the 12th?
The challenge with the 12th, I think it's fine, is Public Works meets on that night.
Who cares about that?
Well, they're in this room.
Oh, well,
Now, we could look at, and I'm pretty sure there's class in that room. It's not to say that finding a meeting room is insurmountable, but the ability to have the hybrid meeting format, if that's important, kind of goes out the window.
I'm in the mayor's office today.
Are you anticipating, what kind of anticipations?
For the-
Stuff, the discussion is gonna come out of this development.
I think they've got, I don't want to speak to it because it's not on our agenda. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, it's interesting because a conceptual review, there's no motions, there's nothing passed, it's just simply giving the developers some advice. And so there would be no action that would be expected from this committee on the referral. Would it just be a feedback backwards?
So they could be coming to us for feedback as well.
Yeah, I think that would be the intent. And they've approached me to meet with me to get my thoughts on there.
Okay.
So,
Well, I personally don't have an issue with meeting on the 5th because I don't have a family that goes anywhere, doesn't.
That works for me.
and that was gonna be my question is, if we have enough to meet on July 5th, it works for me, but I kind of wanted to raise that question.
No, it would be in Colorado.
Okay, well,
But
And I'm
plus
not
it's gonna
sure
be
I
a
need to
hybrid.
Out of town also.
you can phone in.
Well, if it's a hybrid,
Yeah.
I guess we're in hybrids until somebody says different.
Correct, but I think there's still a thought that you have to have quorum in person.
Yeah,
Abby said, I think it was good until August, and then you had to have quorum in person.
Whose decision was that?
Well,
I'm
there's
curious.
there's a difference of opinion between the state attorney general and the city attorney. on the issue.
I think I go with the state. What does he say?
He says you're good until August
well, we would have to have 4 people here in the room.
to have quorum, physical quorum.
I'll be here on the 5th. I can be here on the 5th. So we got three.
I may be here.
Okay, well, the worst thing would happen is we'd have to cancel a meeting for lack of a quorum.
Yeah.
Or you,
How about a different night?
well, that's the problem with the rooms.
Yeah, and you get, there's meetings every night. I mean, that's.
Friday nights, there's meetings.
You can come to my house.
I think that's fair. Let's look at July 5th, and if it doesn't work and we don't have agenda items, I'll gladly cancel the meeting.
Okay. Let's do that. And for those of you who think you can, let's try to be here and have the quorum.
Yep.
All right. All right, I guess that takes care of that. Any other items of business? No, any other new items? Not items on agenda. All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion, we adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. All right, it was a fun meeting in person. Nice.
It's a lot nicer.
Good, much easier discussion, much easier discussion.
You know, there are always times that I feel like I should say something at a meeting, but it's much more awkward.
It's a little hard, you gotta put your hand up and.
Yeah,
We're always talking over people.
yes.
Yeah.